This is the Millennials in Multifamily podcast, brought to you by Kronos Investment Partners. We interview industry experts to unlock key information that will help young professionals break into the multifamily world in order to create long-term and short-term wealth. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to iTunes and leave a rating and written review so we can reach more listeners.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us on today's episode of the Millennials in Multifamily podcast. I'm your host, John Stover, with my co-host, Fritz Ritter. And today we have a very special guest, Josh Roosen, coming on the show. Like so many of us that get started in the real estate investing business, Josh became an accidental landlord when he moved across the country and had to turn his primary residence into a rental property. However, through this experience, he quickly realized the power of owning cash-flowing assets and joined up with one of the nation's largest real estate investing education companies, where he became passionate about helping others while furthering his own investing career. He quickly realized the power of owning multifamily properties over single-family properties, and he joined the Jake and Gino team to grow his portfolio in multifamily while also helping to expand the Jake and Gino community. He's currently the community director at Jake and Gino and has ownership in over 300 units.
Alrighty, Josh, thanks for coming on. Would you like to give us a little bit deeper background? I know we just said your bio, but we'd like to hear more about your story.
Yeah, so let's take it back to where my story starts. I was in 8th grade. I have an aunt who's in real estate investing, and she gave me the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? Surprise, surprise, the book that everyone starts with. And at that age, I read it, but I don't think I was really receptive for the message in that book, meaning it planted a seed. And at that point, I went to high school and I got really big into working out, got really big into biology, and I decided I wanted to be a doctor. So I go to undergrad. We have a pre-professional biology degree, chemistry minor, and actually summer before senior year, I'm getting ready to take the MCAT and I'm working for an orthopedic surgeon. And this guy comes home one day and he's like, "Don't do it. You're crazy. I wouldn't let my kids do it." And I'm sitting there like, what is this guy talking about? So we take a deeper dive and he's like, "Hey, how much debt do you have from school currently?" And at the time I had about 70 grand. And he's like, "Look, you're going to take out at least $50,000 a year from medical school. All your undergrad loans are going to accrue interest. And then also during residency and fellowship," he's like, "you're going to graduate and be $500,000 in debt. And you're, almost 30 years old." And I'm like, "So what? But you make good money." And he's like, "No, you really don't get it." And he starts talking about how in the 90s as a physician, he was making 7 figures a year. And now he's lucky to make half that. And so I grew up very middle class. And I'm like, what? This guy's complaining about making $500,000 a year, like rich people problems, right? And he's like, "No, you really don't get it." He's like, "I predict by the time you graduate, physicians are going to be at 1 to 200,000 a year." He's like, "You're going to live in a 1-bedroom apartment for a decade just to get out from under that debt." So that was enough to scare me out of it. So I moved back home and I decided to get back into business, or that's what he told me to get into, saying he made more money from investments than he did being a doctor at that time. And I tried starting a home healthcare company. That's what I saw as low barrier to entry. I didn't have a lot of capital, and I saw that the silver tsunami was coming, so to say. And I was like, all right, I'm going to make this happen. Well, I didn't know the difference between activity and accomplishment. So 6 months in, I'm living at my parents' house, and I have a website, I have an LLC, I have business cards, I have a brochure, but I didn't generate a penny in revenue. So my parents are like, "This is a pipe dream. You got to get a job or we're going to kick you out." So guys, this time things are getting really real. I have less than $1,000 in my name. I'm driving a car that has almost 250,000 miles on it, and I'm living at my parents' house. Well, 6 months after I graduate, right, it's almost winter time. So we go to my aunt's house, and I grew up in Michigan, and she's the one who gave me Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So in my circle of influence, she was one of the more successful people. And she's like, "Josh, have you thought about real estate?" And I was like, not really. Well, you look around and you see her success, and that planted a seed. So what I did at that point is I took her advice, started looking into real estate, but at the same time, I couldn't try another entrepreneurial pursuit. And so I found a company that taught real estate education in the single family home side that was in San Diego. And I got really excited about the opportunity to work with them. I'm like, they're going to pay me where I can go learn real estate, and I'm going to move in an awesome city. And so I was like, they called it entrepreneurship. So being an entrepreneur within what they teach. And so I took the leap to San Diego to go learn from these guys. And there's a lot of lessons that came with that one as well. So basically, when I moved out there, What happened was I ended up getting a job, right? I've never done a wholesale. I've never done a fix and flip. Instead, what I did do is I started acquiring rentals. So I got one rental in my hometown, and then I started acquiring rentals through turnkey rental companies. And even though my income was scaling up, I was in California, so a spot that was very expensive to live in San Diego, and the taxes were really high, right? And then I got to a point where I was at a ceiling financially. So I was making really good money, although I couldn't trade any more time for money, and it was just taking way too long with the turnkey rentals. So that's a little bit about kind of my early days, how I got into real estate and things like that.
So currently you're the community director at Jake and Gino. So how did you go from buying turnkey rentals to transitioning into multifamily?
Yes, great question, John. So a good friend of mine, like I said, we were at that company and we were maxed out. We were at a ceiling. So we were making pretty good money, but at the same time, being in your early 20s and not having a clear path for promotion is very scary. So we decided what's next. And initially we were going to open up a turnkey or a sales training company. So my buddy went and paid Grant Cardone $7,500 for 1 hour one-on-one with Grant. And when he flew to Miami and spent the time with Grant, Grant said, "Hey, son, when I was your age, I wish I would have gotten into multifamily real estate instead of sales training." He said, "I'd be a billionaire instead of a millionaire if I did that. The only question is how many times over." So super bold statement. But at the same time, Grant's got the net worth to back it up and the credibility. So my buddy flies back to San Diego. We sit and connect and we start diving into multifamily. Now, my boss's boss's boss had Jake and Gino's book on his desk. And so if it was good enough for him, it was good enough for me. We read it. We read Multifamily Millions, Emerging Markets, started going to podcasts in YouTube University, consuming all the information I could. But at that point, I was sold on multifamily. Now, my good buddy, he was taking massive action. So after reading Jake and Gino's book, he actually reached out to these guys and he was like, "Hey, I would love to help you with the real estate education side," because they were in the early days of building out an education company. He was like, "If you teach me how to build this business." They actually turned him down. And so he was so sold on getting into multifamily that he quit his job. He moved to Atlanta and started building the business full-time by himself. So when he did that, these guys actually reached back out and they're like, "Hey, we're looking at taking someone on. Are you still available?" And he's like, "I can't do it, but I know someone who'd be a good fit." And he put him in touch with me.
Can you just give our listeners a time frame of when this was?
Yeah, so late 2017 is when my buddy went to go visit with Grant. March 6th of 2018 is when I made the leap from San Diego to St. Augustine, Florida. That's where Gino lives.
You've scaled up pretty rapidly. You have ownership in over 300 units, correct?
Yeah, so we have one deal that's closing this Friday that'll put me over 300.
So could you tell our listeners, I'm sure pretty quickly you realize that there's some definite advantages to the multifamily over the single family. Can you tell our listeners immediately what you saw?
Yeah. So looking at the two, it's one, economies of scale. So rather than having 10 properties in 10 separate locations and 10 roofs, if you can have 10 properties under one roof, that's one roof that you have to be able to fix every so often. Also, you can start having an on-site property manager with about 50 units. With about 100, you can have a full-time maintenance person. And then the ability to value these things based on the net operating income rather than comps. So that's something that I have a lot more control of. And then also you start seeing that we're becoming a renter nation. If you study the demographic shifts and the trends, what you'll see is, I think I read something the other day, it's like 1/4 of millennials will never own a home in their life, right? So there's renting there, the financing, right? It's also very much based on the income on that. So that's something I liked. So these were a lot of the things that I liked. You could go further faster. And at that time, that was really appealing.
There's definitely a lot of advantages to it. The flip side of that, what are some disadvantages you saw or some challenges you saw breaking into that world, even though you were under Jake and Gino?
Ooh, Fritz, that's a really good question. So versus the single family space, I think this is definitely a marathon, not a sprint, meaning it's very realistic for someone that could take a year to get their first deal. And if you look at my mentors, Jake and Gino, it took them 18 months. So many people are so brainwashed by the fact of trading time for money, right? You punch the clock for a week and you get a paycheck. So to be able to go 6 months or a year and not produce any results, it's hard. And that's why a lot of people give in. But I see that barrier to entry is actually a benefit, right? So if I can do what others won't, I can have what others can't.
So you made the jump from single family to multifamily. Do you still own any of those single families that you took on?
So that's a great question. No, so I liquidated my portfolio and that gave me a big nest egg. Now, it wasn't until November of 2018 that I closed on my first deal. So it was about a year of studying multifamily. And I started getting a little anxious, right? I knew that the money sitting in my checking account was actually in a money market. So making like 1.5%. It's not even keeping up with inflation. So in St. Augustine, I did buy an Airbnb just because I was sitting on this nest egg and it was burning a hole in my pocket. Thankfully, I didn't buy a expensive car. But that's the only single family I have in my portfolio. And the thing cash flows well, but I would probably never do an Airbnb. And we can dive into that if you want as well.
Yeah, no, I think that would provide our listeners a lot of value, especially because I think a lot of people are starting to actually put Airbnbs into some of their apartment units in places like the Southeast, where you have empty nesters are migrating to for vacations. You have snowbirds going down there during the winter.
Yeah. So why I would never do another Airbnb? Great question. With this one specifically in St. Augustine, it's a very touristy city, and they're actually just passed an ordinance making the short-term rental minimum 7 days, meaning that's the minimum stay length you can have someone. Now, thankfully, I lucked out and the zoning of mine isn't included in that ordinance. So I don't know how, because that was an exception, not the norm. But another thing is there's so many different variables at play, right? So let's say that happens in another city, or let's say Airbnb ups their fees, or let's say it gets saturated, right? There's a lot less barrier to entry there. So there's so many different things that could happen that could jeopardize that business. And thankfully, I have a good property manager with that one. But at the same time, it is a much more intensive business, and it can be.
Do you kind of see that affecting Airbnbs, like rent control is affecting multifamily?
I don't per se see rent control, because you don't see rent control on things like hotels, and it's more of a short-term stay. But at the same time, if you look at it, a better analogy is you look at something like doctors, right? They're not unified where the drug companies are, right? So the hotel companies have these lobbyists, and that's taking a big chunk out of their business. And so they're able to get more regulations passed. And then also neighbors, they don't really like if the Airbnb is the party house and it's not getting treated correctly. There's people that are out of state and don't manage them correctly. And so there's definitely more possibility of that getting regulated, as I'm just seeing in St. Augustine, where we know that, if you look at government with housing, they used to do the projects, right? And then they screwed that up. So they did the Section 8 vouchers. But I don't think that the government's going to come in and take over housing like there's the jeopardy of the Airbnbs.
Let's go back to that first deal, because you said you closed on it in November of 2018. The market was really hot at that point, fiercely competitive. And with you being a young guy, how did you add value to get in on that first deal?
Yeah, so let's go back even more to my game plan. So when I first came to Jake and Gino, just a heads up, I was like, guys, look, my goal here is to learn from you, build this business, and then within 3 to 5 years, I'm out, right? I'm not taking the bait and getting another job. That's what I did at the last company. So that was my goal there. And they ended up taking very good care of me. So this deal, how it was found, my good friend, his name's Dylan, he was out, the same one that was out in San Diego with me. He's the one who actually called the broker. And on the first call, he said, hey, I'm coming to town. We're here in Knoxville. And he's driving out to Louisville, Kentucky. And he's like, I want to see what you guys have. So he scheduled a property tour. And he went with Jake and they went and toured some properties. And the first couple they looked at, they looked good on paper, but they were in rougher areas, right? So outside of our buying criteria. And then as they're pulling up to this third one, you start seeing things like a Kroger, a Chick-fil-A, right? So identifiers of the path of progress. And they pull up and the owner's there waiting for them. So another sign it's a mom and pop. So how I was able to add value and get a part of this deal is by seeking to serve my mentors and adding value, building out the education side. And so they allowed me to invest dollar per dollar in this deal, giving me part of the GP and also part of the LP as well, based on what I was able to throw in there.
And so once you had the deal, you closed on the deal, what roles did you take on in the asset management, or was your role just to continue growing the education platform?
Yep. So more on the education side, but as I was able to watch the deal. So let's talk a little bit about that deal, right? So we bought it for about 5.9 million. We've since almost doubled the NOI since we bought it. Rents were at about 550. Market rents were about 700 at the time. Since then, market rent has continued to increase. So we're proving beyond that. Also, there was some land in that deal that we were able to separate, and then we're going to sell that and have it as a return of capital to the investors. We painted the bricks on the exterior. We built in a dog park. Obviously, being in-house and with Jake running Rand Property Management, we were able to lower some of the expenses as well. Things like waste management, right? They're very expensive. So we brought in different vendors to be able to save money on that. We signed a cable contract. That's another thing. So we got a $13,000 check for implementing that. There was also 2 garages in there that they were just filled with stuff. And we have one of them rented out and one of them is for rent. So to be able to rent out to local businesses. So we were effectively able to double the NOI on this property. And that's a lot of the value add that was happening there.
So when you were looking at the property, we use something called the SIOTA process, which is called the strategic evaluation of a target area. And that's how we determine what amenities we're going to add to the property. What data did you guys look at to say, hey, we're going to add this dog park or we're going to add these amenities to the property so we can command those higher rents?
Ooh, that's good. So let's take this bigger picture and then let's dial it into there. So, why we like Louisville as a whole. So Louisville, if you look at it, it's a diverse economy, meaning there's UPS Worldport's there. The Lincoln factory's over there. There's also Humana, a drug company that's crushing it. So all our eggs weren't in one basket with one employer. And then also looking at this specific area of Louisville, it was a nicer area, right? It wasn't a D-class neighborhood. And then it's definitely a C plus, B minus asset. So with that, we didn't go over the top, right? So some of our nicer assets, we have things like trash valet, we have a pool. So with this one, it was more some of the standard amenities we do that are cost effective, so like a dog park.
Okay, so doubled the NOI on this property and we're able to add a ton of value through evaluating all this. Since you bought that deal, how have you seen the market change?
Yeah, so obviously interest rates are taking a hit. I think that the market has always been very tight. So here's what I see, right? You got to look at about 100 deals to find one. And at 100, you look at, you'll probably do a thorough underwriting on 20 of them, maybe put offers in on 10, and you'll end up getting one. So what I think and what I've seen, I guess, in that market is, again, it's tight. The market's still going up. So that's helped us, right? Like I said, our target rent was $700 a month. Since then, we've been able to prove past that. So that's really helped as well. And then also what we've done is we've left some meat on the bone. And this way, when we get time to exit this, there's opportunity for another investor to be able to continue to add value to this property as well.
Is this a syndication deal or is this just with all of your own capital?
Correct. This was a syndication, right? So it was actually the first syndication that Jake and Gino did. And I was very grateful for the opportunity to be a part of it.
Is that where the plan came in to exit in a certain number of years as opposed to just refi and hold so you can return the capital to the investors?
Correct. Yeah. What we found with syndications is it's harder to sell a forever hold to that. Investors are sort of trained for 5 to 7 year or 3 to 5 year hold period. And that's what we've done here. And there's also logic to that too, right? Velocity of capital. So when you're adding value to a property, the money's working way harder. Where if you were to hold that thing once it's stabilized for a lot longer, the IRR starts to decrease.
You're looking at 100, deeply underwriting 20, putting offers on 10 and getting 1. I mean, that's a lot of deal flow and that's a lot of properties you have to go through. How are you getting such a large deal flow?
So currently we're looking to invest in a 4-hour drive radius from Knoxville and then Jacksonville, Florida. So if you look at that, that's a lot of target markets, right? Nashville, Chattanooga, Louisville, Lexington, Huntsville, Alabama. So there's a lot in there. And then it's having a team, right? So you two are a team. You have to stay in front of these brokers. And when they send you a deal, it's underwriting them and getting it back to them very quickly with feedback. So showing them with your actions that you're serious, separating yourself from the majority. And then also it's just the brand name we have, right? So the credibility that people know that we're closers and we're established.
So I handle a lot of the acquisitions on our team, and I call these brokers almost every 14 days. I'm pretty sure I annoy a lot of them, but they definitely know who I am, and it's that track. Our CRM system just continuous. Every time I get a hold of them or don't get a hold of them, it has an action to call them back the next day or in 3 days or in 14 days. So it's definitely important to stay in front of these brokers. Are you guys sourcing anything off market? Like, are you guys doing anything direct to seller marketing?
That's actually a really good question. So at one point, I want to say late 2018, what we did was the market was really tight, right? And we were having trouble finding deals. So we actually established a team of what we call deal dogs. So these were students within the community that were absolutely crushing it, and they were young and they were hungry. And what we did is we pulled lists of data from CoStar or Rayonomy, and we helped train them up with a script to be able to dial direct to owner. to be able to try to increase deal flow because we weren't seeing what we wanted as fast as we wanted as deal flow from brokers. Ultimately, we never did pull a deal from there. And then we ended up just going back to direct to brokers. But we've tried other techniques to make it happen. We just didn't pull anything through with that team.
Within a 4-hour drive, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys have your own property management company.
Correct. So Jake's vertically integrated. And actually, that's something that investors really like. So when you're out there doing a deal, and let's say someone has third-party property management, and let's say the deal is not performing well, you're able to sort of point the finger and say, hey, well, it was a bad property management group. We're going to switch groups. Well, being vertically integrated, the finger always points back at you. So it's another integration to control. So that's been something that's been very valuable with us as well. And then we're able to really, really regulate costs and keep it very affordable.
Within a 4-hour drive, though, could you just tell our listeners about some of the systems and how you're implementing those from a distance? How do you control the property when you can't drive there every day?
So that's a really great question. So it's reading books like The E-Myth or Traction and realizing something that you need almost like a franchise-like model, right? So you look at something like a McDonald's. I could walk into one here in Knoxville, Tennessee, or Gino could walk into one in St. Augustine, Florida, and we'll get a similar product. So what we've done is we personally invest in a coach that helps us implement what we call the scaling up systems. So it's from a book called Scaling Up. The Rockefeller Habits, so what they are, we use Petra coaches. So petracoach.com is if you want to check them out. And they help us systemize those processes in place. And then it's using things like Asana. It's having SOPs, standard operating procedures. And that's what's really allowed us to be able to create it. And then another thing is actually the culture, right? So Jake and Gino allow Rand property management employees that have been with us for a certain amount of time to invest in deals. So they have the ability to grow and create wealth as well. And if your money and your skin is in that game, they're excited about it. They've also created a culture of winning, right? There's different ways that employees can earn bonuses based on performances. So it's incentivizing that. And then we also have a thing called President's Club. So every year, Jake takes the top property management employees out and he takes them to a trip. So last year, I think they went to the Biltmore and they had a great time. And then we do team building activities as well. So we went whitewater rafting. So I really believe the culture is a big thing on how we do that. And the goal there is to be the Chick-fil-A of property management.
Are you struggling to understand how to underwrite multifamily properties? Hi, I'm John Stober, and I completely understand your problem. I thought underwriting would come naturally to me due to my background in finance and accounting, but I quickly found out that there aren't a lot of resources that cover this subject. I had no idea whether what I was doing was right, wrong, or just original. I don't want you to have to pick up little nuggets here and there like I did. So I wrote an ebook called How to Analyze Big Apartment Buildings and Make Them Feel Small that puts together all the pieces of the puzzle. We're also giving away a deal analyzer with the ebook, and they're both completely free. Don't wait as long as I did to start chasing financial freedom. Go to bit.ly/underwriting ebook and get your free copy today.
So can you talk about how that's structured then? So I'm assuming you have like your main headquarters of the management company where you're located in Tennessee. How do you staff up at a place like Huntsville, Alabama quickly when you're taking over the property?
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the structure of the actual property management company. So you have Jake at the top who's running it. Under Jake, we have a regional manager. Her name's Jen Outland. She's an absolute star. And then under that, we have different area managers to kind of manage all those properties. So now talent recruitment and talent acquisition is a whole nother thing. So a lot of times you'll vet the current people there, right? Do they want to stay with the property? Are they leaving with that management company? And if there's opportunity to hire those people that are already familiar with the property, and if they're doing a good job, that's a really great way and low-hanging fruit. Sometimes that's not always the case, right? There's a reason why these properties are for sale, especially if they're mom and pop. They might be on the death spiral. So the same people that got it into trouble may not be the people to get it out of trouble. So we have different tools for recruitment, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Indeed. We use ADP. They have a recruitment tool as well. And then we use a hiring process. I forget the exact name of the book, but it's where you ask them questions, and we have a set list of questions, and we score the answers to those questions. And it's been able to create a consistent product as far as hiring. And then also hire slowly, fire quickly when you have someone who's not a culture fit.
You mentioned the death spiral. Could you just quickly explain to our listeners what that is?
Yeah, so this is actually a really good point, and this is a characteristic of a mom and pop apartment. So let's kind of paint the picture here vividly. So let's say my mom and dad owned an apartment complex, and let's say they passed it along to me, and I don't know what I'm doing, right? So what I may do is I'll keep the rents way under market, but I'm not fixing anything. So their stove may be broken, and they're scared to call me because they're like, holy crap, this guy's going to raise rents. And so the property just continues to go downhill and get in worse condition and get mismanaged because it's like, I don't want to put any money into it. And at the same time, they don't want to call because they're worried their rent's going to go up. So it's the death spiral. It keeps going downhill until eventually it doesn't pay its own bills, unfortunately.
And then a group like yours comes in and picks it up for pennies on the dollar, right?
Not quite pennies on the dollar on this type of market, but it's an opportunity, right? So someone like that, you're able to help solve their problem. You got to look at it as a win-win, right? Success isn't a zero-sum game. So what we're able to do is say, hey, look, like clearly this thing has been a headache and it's not doing well. Let me give these residents a clean, modern, affordable spot to live. Let me make your parents proud and restore this back to its beauty days. And let me fix up the community, right? And then the owner gets a big check as well. But at that point, they can do what they want with it. So sometimes it can be a win-win game.
So in that win-win game, have you ever been able to negotiate some seller financing on some of your deals? Because it seems like if they do get that big check, Uncle Sam's right around the corner.
So I personally have not. Jake and Gino on their first deal, so they did a 25 unit, bought it for $600,000. The bank came to the table with 80% on that one. They got 10% seller financing. And then they came to the table with 10% themselves. And it's tougher in a market like today's market. I think it's kind of the cherry on top. You can't hinge all your deals on that. But definitely knowing how to present seller financing. And like you said, Fritz, being like, hey, I can help defer some of those capital gains and pay you out over the long term. Why don't you hold the note, right? Making it a true win-win is very beneficial, knowing how to do it.
Let's go back for a second. You said that one of the ways you add value to the sellers is you help solve their problems. Well, since you guys are getting most of your deal flow or all of your deal flow through brokers, how are you communicating with the seller that, hey, like we have a solution that's going to be beneficial for you as well as ourselves?
So good question asking skills. So one, we only go through a seller broker, right? We don't have a buyer's broker. So at that point, if you have a buyer broker and a seller broker, there's two walls or two people. That's kind of a layer to get to you and the owner. And if you can ask questions like, hey, why are they selling? What are they going to do with the money? Various things like that. You can begin to understand and it paints a picture. And then from there, you can begin to propose a solution that's a win-win. And the worst that can happen is a no.
So I think on the flip side, some of our listeners might be wondering, but hey, if I have a buyer's broker, that broker has a fiduciary duty to me. So how do you mitigate some of that risk?
Well, if anything, you got to look at it this way, right? So if you just have a seller broker, he may be able to even get more commission, right? So there's some of it in there. And if you really look at it, the way the broker gets paid is by closing the deal, right? Obviously, yes, there's a fiduciary responsibility and he wants to represent that seller. But at the same time, if he's able to make things happen, that's how he's going to get paid. So he wants to come to a mutual conclusion to get the deal done and create a win-win.
Yeah, we've actually haven't had much success at all if there's a buyer's broker. It seems like dual agency is the only way to go in this hot market, especially with everybody, in some opinions, are overpaying. But with this hot market, I guess I would like to know, how are you guys doing your due diligence? When you go to look at deals, what are some of the things you look for that maybe other people aren't seeing to add value? Like some maybe inside tricks that with your management company, you're like, okay, we can lower the water, or we can do low flow sinks or energy efficient. How are some ways you guys are adding value?
Yeah. So one thing that comes down to it is economies of scale, right? We have over 1,000 units here locally in Knoxville. So things we're able to do with that, we're actually just bringing flooring in-house. And we have a construction company as well, a light construction company. So that kind of savings helps a lot. Now, as far as typical value plays, let's say there's a clubhouse, right? Let's say one of the residents want to rent that out to do a Thanksgiving party, right? Or get together with their family. That's a little known way to monetize. You also got to start catering to who you're renting to. So some of our higher class apartments, we do something like trash valet, where they put the trash outside of the apartment complex. They pay a monthly fee for this service, but at the same time, we'll go through and pick it up or have someone that does that. Also, if you provide a really good place for them to live, the tenant turnover rate is lower as well, right? So updating the laundry facilities. No one wants a dingy spot to do laundry. creating rapport with your tenants. So we do gift baskets when they move in. We do resident surveys. So knowing what our residents like and don't like and having that feedback is definitely giving us a competitive edge.
Well, I know a little bit about your guys' management as well, where you guys don't do security deposits. If I'm correct, you guys do a one-time move-in fee. How is that affected versus the security deposit, do you think?
Oh, Fritz, great question. So if you look at a security deposit, you can't count that as income when you collect that from a tenant. And then also on the back end, when they're moving out, it creates tension, right? So is my landlord going to garnish all of my security deposit and nickel and dime me? And it creates a real resentment and negative feeling there. So if we can do a move-in fee as opposed to a security deposit, usually it's less money up front. So let's say, right, it's a C-class apartment. Let's say rents are $800 a month and the security deposit is an additional $1,000. So that's $1,800 that person needs to move into that apartment. Now, if we can do a move-in fee of $400 to $500, all of a sudden that's only $1,200 or $1,300. So we're able to widen the base of potential tenants we have. And then we count that money as income as well. And then on the back end, we use what we call their sure bonds to basically ensure that if anything happens, right, cover our downside risk. And then those bonds buy us additional coverage. And based on sort of the tenant profile is the number of bonds they have to buy. And then if they go above and beyond what the bond covers, that company will actually call and collect the additional funds due.
That is genius. Can you tell our listeners what the name of the company of the insure bonds are?
Yeah, it's Sure Deposit is the name of the company if you want to reach out to them. And if you do want to reach out to them, I'll actually personally introduce you to our rep. Just email me, josh@jakeandgino.com, and I'll give you a connection to who we use. But it's definitely a way to, one, increase net operating income, two, widen your tenant base, and then also three, not have that tension on the back end when you're moving out. Like, oh man, my landlord is going to nickel and dime me for this whole security deposit. Like, that's not a thing anymore.
To everyone listening, we will definitely put the name of that company in our show notes so you can reach out to them ourselves, or you can reach out to Josh. But I've never heard of that, and I think that is brilliant. Such a smart way to increase NOI and attract tenants. So what I want to know is, it's 2020. Everyone has been calling for a crash for almost 10 years right now. This run just keeps on going. Where do you see the market going over the next 2 to 5 years, and how is that affecting your guys' strategy?
Okay, so conservative underwriting, number one, right? You got to be able to stress test a deal. So what happens if we have negative rent growth, right? What happens if it's a standstill? So you can't aggressively underwrite saying, hey, rent's going to grow at 5%. So it's hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. Also, we're financing with long-term debt right now, right? 5 years in, it's very realistic we could be in a recession, and you don't want to get caught, so to say, with your pants down on that. So my personal predictions of the economy, it's an election year. I think that the president's going to do everything he can to keep the economy hot. Where it goes from there, I don't know. But my whole thing is hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Obviously, it's not if, it's when we're going to have a recession. I don't think we'll see something as bad as '08. I don't think the lending as predatory as it was then. But at the same time, I'm sure that eventually we're going to have one. But you also don't want to sit at the sideline the whole time waiting for it. It's knowing how to buy it in each market cycle. So another thing we're doing is we're moving to higher quality assets. So if you look at a lot of these C-class assets built in the 60s and 70s, what's happening right now is that there's a CapEx tsunami, right? So things like the sewers are needing to get replaced, and you're getting under this wave of due diligence or wave of CapEx that's eating up a lot of the returns. So we want to have a higher quality asset where we know these returns are real and we're not going to get hit by, kind of catching a falling knife, right? Having the economy drop, but then all of a sudden all this unplanned CapEx, that could be potentially dangerous and something that's very on our radar with the properties we're touring now.
So with these newer assets, though, how are you guys growing the net operating income?
Yeah, so let's talk about a little bit more about why we're going into them. So obviously with the cap rate compression we're having, the difference in cap rate to go from a C to a B isn't very much, right? There's been a big compression within the space. So to grow the NOI on properties like that, you're able to do things like the trash valet. Or sometimes you look for ways to, rather than to cut or add income, to cut expenses. Right. I'll give you a thing here. We had a property we took over that there was Wi-Fi included in it. We took that out. Right. So when you grow income, for every dollar in income, usually there's some expenses that are associated with it. But if you can cut the expenses, that dollar saved is a true dollar to the bottom line.
Right. And then the value of the property is all based off of the cap rate. So it just increases the value by even more.
Yes, exponentially. I agree.
So are you all looking for assets with less renovation? And the reason I ask is I recently read an article by CBRE. A lot of these large institutional funds are looking for what they call core assets. So assets that they're pretty much turnkey and they can just manage them more efficiently to grow NOI. And what they found is that people are overpaying so much for value add assets that by the time they're done with their renovations, they could have bought an asset that was 10, 20 years newer and not have the risk that goes along with the renovation, taking too long, overspending on your budget. Is that what you guys are doing, or are you still doing some like interiors, painting, adding in playgrounds and dog parks?
Yeah. So John, exactly what you said, right? The light value add. So we're not buying core plus like Grant Cardone is. Those things, like you said, lower returns, but there's also less risk as well. What we're doing is waiting for the right asset to hit. Obviously, if you're going to get a deal on finance with agency debt, right, you need 90% occupancy for the last 90 days. You need a certain debt service coverage ratio. So we're not getting into risky deals or hairier deals where you need a bridge loan. Light value add is kind of what we're looking for.
So you just said a lot of complicated terms. Could you go over what agency debt is, bridge loan, and debt service coverage ratio, just in case anyone listening doesn't know those terms?
Yeah. So, okay, agency debt is going to be your Freddie Mac and your Fannie Mae. Those are where you're able to get long-term fixed rate debt, right? Freddie Mac, their SBL program will lend to newer investors. Fannie Mae, you need a little bit more experience. When you're looking at something like a bridge loan, they'll touch hairier deals, and it is a little bit more expensive money. Usually with that, there's a smaller loan term. So let's kind of play out an example here. Let's say we buy a hairier deal and it's a big value add strategy, and we don't hit that value add strategy, or the economy tanks year 3 or year 4, and we're not able to refi and the loans due. That's recourse debt, and that can have some serious repercussions. As you know, there are a lot of people wiped out in '08. Generally, multifamily is a more recession-resistant asset, but at the same time, the implications of that, there's more risk involved with those deals. And where we're at in the market cycle, we want to prepare because no one has a crystal ball to predict what's going to happen. Now, the debt service coverage ratio, what that is simply just taking the net operating income, which is defined as you take all the income the property makes and you subtract out all the expenses before the mortgage, and you divide that by the price of the mortgage, right? So we look for stuff that's at least a 1.25, meaning this property can pay its mortgage and then has extra there as well, right? So again, why we like multifamily, this is another reason. You're buying cash flowing assets from day one and you're making them more efficient. If you compare that to a single family fix and flip, the market is dictated by comps. And in '08, comps tanked. Also, you're holding this fix and flip and there's carrying cost in there. So it's not cash flowing from day one. So you're able to take something where you're reducing risk because it's making money day one and paying you, and you're just making it more efficient.
Right. And I think the most speculative part of when you're underwriting a multifamily deal is the analysis. And when you're doing a fix and flip on a single family property, that's how you make your money. It's all on that sales price. And if you don't really know what that is, your analysis is going to be much less accurate than with a multifamily property where, hey, maybe you overestimated your sales price, but you're cash flowing that entire time.
Yes, 100%. I agree.
So Josh, you're the community director with Jake and Gino. What exactly does that mean, and what's kind of like your role today?
That's a good question. So when I came here, the opportunity I had was to grow the community, and the vision that we mutually aligned on was the white glove service of multifamily investing. So I firmly believe that there's a lack of financial education out there. I never was taught any of this stuff in high school, but I was taught geometry that I'll probably never use again. So the vision is to empower others to be able to achieve their purpose through financial education. And a little bit of my role here is almost more like a COO. Gino's like the CEO. So it's building out the systems, like an ecosystem, through coaching, live events, the ability to partner with us on deals, through a training center, through a weekly class, leveraging our connections and our relationships to be able to help someone achieve their goals much quicker. So one thing I've learned and I've seen in life is time is my most valuable asset, right? It's all ending 1 second at a time. None of us can get any more of it. And so if I can help someone achieve their goals that much quicker, it's invaluable in my opinion. It's the reason people go buy a McDonald's when all three of us on the call here could go flip a hamburger. Franchise like that's $1 million. Or even look at something like Menchie's frozen yogurt. Those things are self-serve, for goodness sakes. And people pay $380,000 to open up a Menchie's, right? It's a proven business plan and a system that works. And that's really my goal here, is to help build the best community and ecosystem to empower others to be able to achieve their goals through multifamily real estate investing education.
So what do you think makes the Jake and Gino Academy different from the other programs out there?
So what I really like about these guys, and when I told you guys early on that, hey, I came here like, look, 3 to 5 years, I'm out. My long-term vision has not shifted. And this will talk into why as well, where I want to grow this and continue to grow my portfolio as well. One, it's the people at the top, right? Jake and Gino as humans, their ethics, the integrity, the relationships they have with their family. It's something I can get behind as well. A good example of that is 2 weeks ago, I was at Gino's house for a week. I stayed with him. He treated me like I was his 7th kid. And I just am very grateful for that. And they have the same care and concern with each student that we work with. Another thing is they're vertically integrated, meaning they have a management company. They've bought their own deals. They've done refi and roll. And so the fact that they've also done syndication, so they've done it in all facets of the business. We also own a loan brokerage, right? So it's every single aspect there that these guys have been able to do.
I love how you guys are generating revenue from all these different sources of income. And you got the brokerage, you got the multifamily, you got the coaching. So I think it's really amazing what you guys are doing. So Josh, I think we're running out of time. We wanted to get to our section called the Fast Five. These are the same 5 questions we ask every guest that comes on our show. So are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So first question, if you had to start all over again and you were in your early 20s, how would you do that?
Oh man, first thing I would do is find a mentor. So it doesn't matter who it is, but find someone that has the results that you want, that you believe they can replicate it with you, that you know, like, and trust, and go all in, right? A ship is safe at the harbor, but that's not what ships are meant for, right? I think that you risk mediocrity. So put all the chips on the table. And that's what I would have done early on.
For sure. Second question, how do you see young professionals adding value to experienced operators in the multifamily space?
All right, that's a great question. I'll give you an example. We have a young student. His name's Nick Amaluxon. He's partnered with Mark Henteman. So Mark, co-authored The Family Guy, or he's a writer for them. What Nick did is, 1, he got educated. So through our community, it doesn't matter what community you join. And then 2, he took massive action. So he brought the sweat equity where Mark had the balance sheet and more experience. So it's getting educated, number 1, and 2, taking massive action.
What's the biggest mistake you've made in your career, and how have you since adjusted your business?
Okay, so in my career, this is going back to me in college, right? I have student loan debt. At the age of 18, it's the go to school to get a job type thing. And I just thought it was the norm to do. In my business, what I've done, so check this out. I technically, if you look at it, it's like I should pay my student loans off. But my interest rate's only 6%. I've set that money out to work for me in these investments, making double-digit percentages to be able to get enough to get a big snowball. And then once I'm extremely liquid, I'll just go ahead and pay those off.
All right, you have a nice spread.
Yes.
So with us being in the technology world now and social media, what's your favorite way to incorporate technology and social media into your business?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I like the idea of sharing what you do with other people, right? It's encouraging. So like you guys are creating this podcast, having a Facebook group, be able to add value to that journey, because you never know who you're impacting or whose lives you change or who's watching from the sidelines. So I think that the ability to be connected through all the different social media platforms and share that and document that journey is a really awesome way to inspire people you may not even know you're inspiring.
That's awesome. Last question. Besides the Wheelbarrow Profits book by Jake and Gino, do you have a favorite book that you can recommend to our listeners?
Yeah. So one of the biggest books that impacted my life is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I'll dive into a couple of the habits. One was time blocking, when the analogy they used about the rocks, the pebbles, and the sand, about using your time effectively. I think that made my productivity go up 50%. The other one is they talk about a story where these guys are in the forest and someone's walking up to them and they have this old-fashioned saw and they're trying to saw down this tree, and it's this rusty, dirty, nasty saw. And the guy comes up to him, he's like, hey, don't you think you have time to, sharpen your saw? And they're like, no time, too busy. So what I took away from that is it's like, I can grind as hard as I want. And you can look at when I tried doing my home healthcare company, right? There's a huge difference between activity and accomplishment. So always being able to learn and sharpen your skills was a huge takeaway for me from that book as well.
Well, that's definitely one that's going on my list now. Well, Josh, thanks so much for joining us on the show. You've added a tremendous amount of value to our listeners. I know I've learned a ton of new information that I'm going to implement into our business. Is there a way that our listeners can get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can email me, josh@jakeandgino.com. Also, I'm on Instagram at jroosen23. Give me a follow. I'll follow back. And Fritz and John, I just want to say I really appreciate being a guest. I hope that this story inspires a couple of your listeners, and love what you guys are doing as well.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for listening to the Millennials in Multifamily podcast, brought to you by Kronos Investment Partners. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and a written review at iTunes so that we can connect with more people. Finally, head on over to kronosinvestmentpartners.com and sign up for our newsletter so you can stay updated on everything we're doing. If you're interested in partnering with us as we find new opportunities, you can also schedule a phone call with us under the Contact Us tab at kronosinvestmentpartners.com.